Alrighty there, folks, and welcome to the Chronicle Podcast channel once again. And this is going to be part 2 of my discussion with Mark from the Warlords of History podcast, and we're going to be discussing the warlord Tal Tal. Now, you may have noticed that whenever Mark and I are talking at the same time, within when we were speaking live to each other, there is a bit of an echo from what Mark is saying. Now, that is not Mark's fault, that is mine. And what I foolishly did was I didn't plug my headphones into my laptop. Therefore, the microphone that I was using, which was a Bluetooth one, was picking up all of the conversation from my side as well as Mark's. So in order to try and keep it, seem a little bit more authentic and without, too much of a harsh cutting, I tried my best to align the conversation as the best I could. But then, of course, because it's an echo that my microphone was picking up, it does put everything out of sync. So, yeah, apologies for that. There isn't much I can do about that now, unless, of course, Mark and I have the 2.5 hour discussion again, which, to be honest, I mean, as much as it was fun, I don't think it's wise to do that. We learn from our mistakes, so I know next time to use headphones. So yeah, this is going to be part 2, and just before we get into it, I do want to recommend Mark's podcast. I cannot recommend it enough. It's really good, and what I really like about it is that Mark tries his best to tell a narrative story about the different warlords and stuff that we come across through history, and of course he covers a variety of different warlords. His most recent one, of course, was Philip II of Macedon, and it's a really good show. So I do recommend that you go and check it out. But for now, on with the show.
Yeah.
Alright, perfect. Okay, so yeah, where were we again? I forgot where we were there.
So we we just finished with "I'd rather do wrong to the world than allow the world." So this is right before he starts building his own army in 190.
Right, okay, yeah. So after so what happened after the Yellow Turban Rebellion? In a nutshell, was Dongzhuo usurped power within the imperial court, and then a coalition is led by Yuan Shao to try and defeat Dongzhuo. But the problem was, everyone who was involved in the coalition, you had Cao Cao, Yuan Shao, and his half-brother Yuan Shu, amongst others, people like Gong Sun Zan and things, all of them were scheming against each other. So they were all rivals for power, and all of them knew that they were. So they all joined the coalition just to try and, try and get that little bit of extra territory for themselves. They didn't really care about the fact that Dongzhuo had usurped power. Nobody really cared about that. And then it became evident when everyone's backstabbing each other and nobody's even fighting or anything, and it was just almost like a standoff. So on the east side of Luoyang, you had the coalition forces basically standing there, and then on the other side was Dongzhuo and his adopted son Lu Bu, who we can get to later on, but we'll stick to Cao Cao for now. And the only battle that I actually seen was the Battle of Hulao Pass, and it's only one of these warlords within the coalition who actually fought Dongzhuo's forces. The rest of them just sat around doing nothing. So when he was requesting help, all of them ignored him, rather than, helping their friend, so to speak. So it was, and then shortly after that, Cao Cao just decided to leave. He just said, "Nah, this coalition's a waste of time." So then he just left. And then it is here, because the thing is, it didn't really matter, because a couple of years later, Dongzhuo got killed by his own subordinates anyway. Now, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, it does talk about how one of the ministers presented his daughter to Dong Zhuo, and then he presented his daughter to his favourite general, Lu Bu, and then made them fight over her. But I mean, again, it's all romance. It didn't happen, or it's mostly fictional as far as we know. And because Dong Zhuo died, what happened after was there was a power struggle within the imperial court, and then this is when the emperor fled, and he then ran into the hands of Cao Cao, and then this is when Cao Cao really, begins to build his power, and it's through diplomacy rather than military conquest at this stage. It's all using imperial edicts under the emperor's name to bring all these warlords to heel.
Yeah.
And then it does come to a head when Yuan Shao's brother, Yuan Shu, declares himself emperor out of the blue. Like, this was like, because it was like totally out of the blue, just because nobody was expecting anybody to really, declare their own dynasty yet. Like, everyone knew the Han dynasty was going to fall, but they were all still fighting in the name of the Han. So for somebody just to come out and say, "Oh, by the way, I'm emperor now," he was like public enemy number one. And of course, Cao Cao, being the defender, so to speak, of the Han, couldn't tolerate that. So then he launched this brutal invasion against Yuan Shu, and there's a couple of stories that I'll get into in a minute, but I just this just kind of highlights Cao Cao's character, his ruthlessness, so to speak. Because as soon as Yuan Shu declared himself emperor, Cao Cao moved his army so quickly into Yuan Shu's territory, and then this is where the phrase comes from, speak of Cao Cao and he'll arrive.
Oh no, I was just gonna mention, because you had mentioned about his ruthlessness, and even in the years leading up to before he took possession of the emperor, I think it was in the early 190s, is his father Cao Song was killed, and this was, I think, I'm not exactly sure who, but this was, as you mentioned, this was a chaotic time. There's all these warlords fighting amongst each other, and it was getting really, really insanely crazy busy, and just all kinds of different factions coming into the fold. And this is one that I think really crystallized the fact that Cao Cao was, he could be abjectly, just really, really ruthless and cruel. Like, when he went into in retribution of his father's murder, he went into, I think it was Chu province, and it was insane. Like, he butchered so many people. There was one quote that I remember reading that the slaughter was so brutal and so extensive that corpses stopped the Sea River. And I thought that was just an unreal reaction. And I mean, probably one of the few times that he acted out of passion, right? Typically it was a very calculated approach, but he certainly displayed a strong ruthless streak there. But then, I thought it was interesting that when that other warlord, he really took that taboo step of proclaiming himself as emperor. That's where you start to see another iteration of Cao Cao really acting in that kind of law-abiding manner, like doing so on the behalf of the Han, but completely going in and unwilling to even entertain such a notion, because it was so taboo. You said everyone was a warlord and everyone had their little region. Who had the gall to proclaim themselves as emperor, right? Like, I mean, yeah, he took it upon himself to go and address that right away, right?
Yeah, basically. But yeah, going back to the death of his father. So, what happened was his father was traveling from one province through Shu province to see Cao Cao in Yan province. That was the whole purpose of the journey. Now the warlord, well, he wasn't even a warlord. He was more like a governor. He was still a subject of the imperial court. He didn't want anything to do with the squabbling of the warlords, so to speak. His name is Tal Chiem. Now, the thing is, to try and please Tal Tal, he got one of his greatest generals to escort his father to like one border to the other in order to like make sure his passage was safe. But the problem was that this general in particular used to be a yellow turban. So then what happened was, along the way, he just decided, why not just kill Tal Song, like Tal Tal's dad, and then take all of his money, and then we'll become bandits. And that's what they did. So like him and his subordinates killed Tal Tal's dad, and then that was it. So it was a huge miscalculation on that warlord who was trying to please Tal Tal. And like it backfired completely. But one thing that should be noted is that Tal Tal used this as an excuse. Like, he did say, oh yeah, it's like for my dad and things, but that was only to give him legitimacy to invade. Just because Shu provinces, it gave Tal Tal access to like the central plains where Yuan Shu was later on. So by invading, with this ruthless invasion, like it did give him access to more areas of land without having to try and navigate the Yellow River and things. So as much as it was like, because I mean, like you said, it was relentless and it was horrible. Like I read a story where even the farm animals were killed and everything. He ordered everything to be killed, just like for retribution of his father. And it was just crazy. So yeah, just like, again, it just goes to show his like ruthless side. And like, I think it was passion, but as well as that, it was a calculated approach. Like there was a reason behind him saying, oh yeah, kill everything and like try and like please my father's soul in heaven and all of these things. Like there was definitely a calculated approach to it as well.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I know typically like he was a type of leader that understood the importance of food and I know that he even later on he resettles people onto available plots of land to ensure that not only the people have means through which to feed themselves, but also to help supply the army as well. But wow, he really went hard on that one. If he was like, I mean, not only people but animals and crops, and yeah, that was on a scale unparalleled. I don't think that he went to that scorched earth policy in any other territory as hard as he went there.
Yeah, he didn't. Like everywhere else, because I think it was after this, the land that he settled got hit from a plague of locusts and things. So then that's when like he realized the importance of food and tried to like get as much crops in as possible and help feed the people within his region and things. And so like we'll get to that now, just because when he's on this campaign against Yuan Shu, when he declared himself emperor, Cao Cao did give orders to his men, like when they were on the road, and he told them, if you disturb any crop, one single crop, you'll be executed. And like always, apply to everyone, so generals, foot soldiers, cavalry, even himself. And whilst on the road, Cao Cao's horse, for whatever reason, like when it was dragging his chariot, completely freaked out and then ran onto the field. And then this is when Cao Cao said to his scribe, like, okay, what's the punishment? And then obviously his scribe's like freaking out because he's thinking, did I say what the punishment is? Or like, I want to keep my head, so I don't really know what to say here. And then this is when Cao Cao was like, no, I wrote the law, so tell me what it says. And then he goes, okay, well, the sentence is death. So then this is when Cao Cao says, okay, how are you going to carry out my sentence? And then this is when all of the generals and all the foot soldiers, they're all pleading for his life. It's all a big scene. It's always big drama when it comes to these things. Yeah. And and then this is when Tal Tal says, well, how could I expect my men to obey my laws when I don't obey my own laws? And it's one of his advisors, Xun Yu, who I mentioned earlier. He's the one who says, well, you've been given this edict by the emperor to take care of Yuan Shu. So how are you going to do that if you kill yourself now? And then this is when Tal Tal goes, right, okay then. So in order to appease everyone, he then cuts off his hair. And he gets one of his cavalry commanders to parade his hair around all of the men and say, "Oh, Tal Tal, he broke the law, but because of this edict, he's cut off his own hair." And in the West, we would be thinking, "Well, that's not a big deal. He only cut off his hair." But in China, it was a huge deal. You're not supposed to cut your hair or cut your fingernails or anything. It's more about keeping what your ancestors gave to you. So it was a nice little morale booster for his men, so to speak, when he was going into battle.
Isn't that amazing? This goes back to that whole PR spin that a leader has to have as well. Obviously, again, fulfilling the actions and these really prominent objectives that one has, but underneath of that is they're also in some sense a bit of a performance artist as well, helping to trying to enforce their own stand for. I mean, what better way than and this must have been kind of prefabricated in terms of how it was applied to a certain degree, right? But what better way to crystallize your or to enforce this notion of you being totally subject to the law, no different than anyone else, really, right? And it just makes him seem like more of part of it versus being something superior to the law. And as soon as you start doing that's setting the tone for exactly what you want your rule to look like. Because by all accounts, as soon as he took possession of the emperor in 196, certainly not in name, but in every other fashion, he was it. But beyond that point, that was the point, right? That was the groundbreaking point. As soon as he took possession of Emperor Qian, then that's it. He was the man, right? He gained so much legitimacy towards his actions, right? Wasn't he? I think some of his titles included Minister of Works, a General in Chief, and I think that was the top one, right? General in Chief of the Imperial Army.
Yeah, well, the thing is, what's surprising is that when Dong Zhuo took the emperor into his hands, he named himself chancellor straight away. So he's in charge of the finances and things as one of the top positions, whereas Cao Cao didn't. He just said, "Oh yeah, just move the imperial court into my capital, and I'll protect you." They're just "Yeah, I'll protect you. Don't worry." And then it became very clear that Tal Tal was usurping all of the power, and he was basically emperor in everything but name. So it's even in the books and things. I'll go back to the romance, but there's a time where one of his advisors goes, "Oh, there's an emergency," and then he just goes, "Oh, just write an edict." As if he's the emperor, but of course he needs the emperor's stamp to say it was the emperor. So it's just one of those things. Just "Yeah, I'm saving you, I'm saving the Han," but really he was just laying the groundwork for his own dynasty in the future. 100%.
Oh, I definitely. There's no question that as soon as as soon as the emperor went to his base of power, where he was stationed, his headquarters, that's it. He had everything, and the kind of the I guess the negative impact of that is it started creating enemies for him as well. Especially in everything was a mess. We know that for sure. Versus what you set out from before, which I can agree with more. But I think within the North, that really created. As soon as that happened, as soon as he took possession of the emperor, another really powerful warlord. In fact, his childhood friend Yuan Shao, right? I think that's the Yuan Shao. As soon as that happened, he was also one of the few remaining really powerful warlords at that point, and that's pretty much set them into a collision course, right? For who was going to hold ultimate control over northern China.
Yeah, I mean, like, the thing is, when the Emperor fled and he was going, like, he was traveling back to Luoyang, everyone expected Yuan Shao to rescue the Emperor, but it was Cao Cao, because Yuan Shao was actually closer, but it was Cao Cao
Right.
who, like, ran all the way to get
And
the
be and
Emperor.
sorry.
And as soon as Cao Cao got the Emperor, he then sent an edict to all of the surrounding warlords, and Yuan Shao was one of them. And then, of course, Yuan Shao's advisors were like, "Oh, you should have got the Emperor, because then you could have been doing this, you know." So then it just creates this bitter rivalry between the two of them. Going, we should have did that.
No, you're right, but like I mean, what another perfect example of Cao Cao's strategic vision, right? He saw that opportunity. He saw it before any other prominent warlords, and he jumped on it tenaciously. I mean, that again, of all so far of the warlords that I've really gone into, those that do that effectively, though, it's not just about luck, right? What's that other saying that you make your own luck sometimes, or at least the iteration of it in this case would be you see an opportunity and you be the first person at the gates to take advantage of it. Because as soon as you start doing that, and you're able to do that more aggressively than others surrounding you, you're starting to see that separation, right? You're starting to see versus this whole world of all these warlords, and then Cao Cao starts climbing the rungs steadily but surely. Again, despite some setbacks, but he doesn't stop climbing those rungs.
Yeah, 100%. And then, of course, this is when, like, Yuan Shao's brother, Yuan Shu, like, declares himself emperor and things. And then, again, like, because Cao Cao has the emperor, like, any action that he pursues militarily is backed by the imperial court. So, like, he's legitimate for everything that he does now. So, like, it doesn't matter, like, he could say Yuan Shao's a usurper, which he does later on, or he says he's an enemy. And, like, all the other warlords who are, fighting in the name of the Han, they have to agree with him. Otherwise, they'll be like painted with the same brush. So, it was just like,
And you're right.
yeah, it's just like an amazing.
And
This is right. Oh, on you go.
Oh no! Sorry, it's just so it's so funny. As just as a side, it's awesome how engaged I am. This is like awesome, man. I love it. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right on that. And once he does gain that legitimacy, I know for the next couple of years, he really goes on quite the tear in terms of military incursions. Because I mean, right now he's completely justified with that authority and even all those titles that he gains. And he goes on pretty aggressively over the next couple of years, expanding all the territories under his thumb, right? Of course, trying to do so on behalf of the Han, but clearly under his own power.
Yeah. And I mean, it's amazing because, like, as soon as he gets the Emperor, his because, like, he's only in one province at this stage. But then after that, like, because he's defeated Yellow Turbans, like, in his area and things, but rather than, like, killing them all, which a lot of other warlords would have done, he recruited them. So, like, he, rather than, like, saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to, like, murder all of you," and, like, there's stories where some warlords buried the Yellow Turbans alive and everything. Whereas he didn't do that. He went, "Okay, you've got a choice. Either you join me or you farm," which is quite spectacular. So a lot of these people, they just went, "Okay, we'll join the army," and that increased his army size, and as well as that, he managed to train them into, like, elite units as well. So, like, he gained a lot from doing this, and then of course he's doing this in the name of the Emperor. And then it just becomes a matter of time before he expands, which is what happens. So he does it through diplomacy. Yeah. And there's also stories where he will issue imperial edicts to like two warlords, and then he'll tell both of the warlords that they're trying to attack each other or they're going to attack each other. And then so then he makes them two fight each other, and then after their forces are depleted, he'll move in and take over and things. It's just like, that's genius. Like, I would never have thought of that.
No, so I have to say, here's another uncanny Philip comparison. So Philip of Macedon, he became a master of pitting enemies against one another, or yeah, some of his adversaries against one another, just clearly calling out objectives. So that is just another similarity. I can't believe we're stumbling upon even more at this point. But you mentioned how Cao Cao would incorporate some of the units and conquered peoples and military units into his own army, which is obviously a brilliant strategy because he's quickly increasing his power on much quicker at a much quicker rate than others are doing. Philip would do something very, very similar, where upon conquering a new territory, in fact, one of his first incursions was into another tribal territory called Paeonia, and they had these light infantry military units called peltasts, and they were kind of like these javelin throwing guys that were very lightly armored. They could go and quickly scurry in front of heavily armored hoplite warriors and pelt them with javelins and then run away because the hoplites would never be able to catch up to him. And Philip saw this in one of his kind of first incursions to strengthen Macedon. And right away, he saw this as an opportunity. He goes, wow, there's a great specialized type of unit. And he shortly thereafter incorporated peltasts into his army as well. And I mean, and he did that everywhere he went. When he went to Thessaly, he took their Thessalian light cavalry and he incorporated that into his army. And he was constantly seeing this vigilant thing, like wherever someone can get an edge, very similar to Cao Cao incorporating all these new units into his army as well.
Yeah, because I mean, like later on as well, Cao Cao would bring in the Xiongnu from like Mongolia into China, just because of their like military might and because they were the best cavalry around. Even after the Han had defeated them like hundreds of years before, they were still like the best cavalry unit. And yeah, Cao Cao did bring them in, but it did come back to haunt like the Tao Wei dynasty later on, because all these nomadic people, when they're, because like the Chinese were trying to like assimilate them into their own culture, whereas these people just thought, I've got a taste of power now and I'm going to usurp it, and then that's what happened. And yeah, like centuries of chaos followed after that, just because of this Cao Cao trying to incorporate these like elite units into his army. But I mean, that's way into the future. So yeah, like after this incident where, you know, like the PR stunt that Cao Cao had, he actually came up with another one. Like the thing is, I think this is more, how would I describe it? It's more fictional. Like nobody really knows if it's true, but I do want to bring it in just because, you know, like, again, it just kind of brings the character to life, so to speak. So, during the final siege against Yuan Shu, Cao Cao's army was running out of supplies. And he knew this was a real problem because the defenders were holding out quite well, and, you know, he needed to storm the castle pretty quickly. Well, not the castle, the city. But anyway, so he came up with this brilliant, brutal plan where, you know, he would tell the man in charge of the grain supply to cut the grain supply. The thing is, like, he'd already cut the grain supply by half, and he said, you need to half it again because we need to last for another, like, 7 days. So then the guy's like, well, there'll be a revolt. And then this is when Cao Cao says, well, I'm trusting you to handle it. So then the guy's like, okay. So he did his duty. He cut the grain supply by half. And then within a couple of days, of course, all the soldiers are rioting because, like, you know, they're all starving basically.
Oh my gosh.
And then this is when Tal brings in the grain supply, get like the manager again, so to speak, and then he says, "Okay, I need to borrow something from you." And then the the man says, "What do you need to borrow?" And he says, "Your head."
Wow.
So then, of course, the guy's like freaking out. He's like, "Oh no, please spare me, spare me!" And then he says, "I'm innocent." And then this is when Tal says, "I know you're innocent. So what are you going to do?" And then he gets dragged off and executed. And then this is when Tal makes a speech to his soldiers saying, "Oh, by the way, the reason why your grain is so low is because this guy was stealing. Have a massive feast tonight, and then tomorrow you'll storm the castle." And then that's what happened. Like, the morale was at its highest. They were all, their bellies were full, and the troops stormed the city and won. That's insane.
That is absolutely insane. What was the backdrop? Was this during like what battle was this during, kind of near Guandu? Like when did this happen?
So it was just before Guandu. So this is when Tal was fighting Yuan Shao's brother, Yuan Shu. So this was like his final stronghold in Runan province. And like Tal's supplies were running quite low, so he came up with this strategy, so to speak, to like get the men like on board with him. Kind of, it's crazy.
And I thought your earlier story was an example of good performance artistry. This is a next level thing. Like, this is, wow. Talk about creating things for impact. That would certainly do so. That the motivation that he kind of instilled in his troops, and really at the cost, I mean, it's still sad for that guy, but for the cost of one person's life, to create this this raring army ready to go to storm castles. That is, wow, amazing.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, if you're going to go from the novel, like, Tal does say, "Well, let's be honest, my family background's better than yours, and I'll take care of your wife and kids." And then that's his last words to him before he gets executed. And like, that's pretty harsh. It's like, not only are you getting killed, but you're like, I'm better than you. Just like,
that is, wow, that is brutal. That's amazing. I honestly, I had never heard about that story. That is, wow, that's a great one.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's fictional, but like, I had to plug it in. I just like,
that's too good not to include. Are you kidding me? That's amazing.
like, it's weird in a sick, twisted way. I kind of hope it's true. Like, not for, like, obviously, not for that poor soul who died, but
I know.
Like, I kind of hope that's.
I know. It's funny when I'm going through my stories, and we were talking about this earlier on, right? Sometimes it's really hard to separate fact from fiction, and you also have to consider the agenda of the who is writing the historical account or whatever story, because there's always a reason, right? They're always trying to either prop up the person or chop them down and somehow cast a negative light on them, right? So it speaks to our notion, like what you were mentioning before. It's our job to try to kind of cut through this and figure it out. But sometimes when you hear a story that fits so well, man, you want it to be true. I completely understand. That. Wow.
Okay, there, folks, and there you have it. So that concludes part 2 of the discussion Mark and I had about the warlord Tal, and we will conclude this discussion next week. And then, of course, after that, you'll just be hearing my voice again. You're not going to be hearing anybody else. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be discussing the Three Kingdoms period. Now, I was hoping to try and, break this down, just one episode for the Three Kingdoms, but it seems like it's almost too difficult to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the foundation of each separate kingdom and then talk about the kingdoms themselves. So it's weird because I'm going to start off with Tal Wei, and I've spent 3 episodes, like 3 weeks almost, talking about Tal, but he was the first one to form one of the Three Kingdoms, basically. So, like, without talking too much about Tal Tal himself. We'll talk about Talway and like how it was established, and then we'll move on to Dongwu, which is the Sun family in the southeast, and then the final of the three kingdoms was Shu Han, founded by Liu Bei. So what I'll do is I'll have an episode discussing how these kingdoms came into being, and it kind of follows the chronological order, so to speak, because whilst Tal Tal is establishing himself in the north, the Sun family have managed to establish themselves in the southeast, and Liu Bei is still like trying to find a foothold somewhere. And then of course later on, this is when Liu Bei does find his foothold in the southwest. So I think that's the best way to go about it. And then of course, once all three of these kingdoms have been established, I'll then talk about the Three Kingdoms period itself. And what I'll probably do is include the short-lived Jin dynasty that follows, just because the Three Kingdoms period doesn't last long. Like, it really doesn't. And the Jin dynasty that follows afterwards doesn't last long either. So we can fit both of these dynasties into the one episode. And then from there, I'll then tackle the mess that is the Northern and Southern dynasties era, which, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And then, of course, we'll then go back to, like, reunification and stuff. Now, we are almost at the end of this, like, very long period of division and warfare and stuff. And then there is these times of more stability, so to speak. We're almost there, so just bear with all this warfare and stuff. And then we could focus more on a long period of prosperity, so to speak. But yeah, that's the schedule for the next few weeks, so I hope you stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next time on the Chronicler Podcast channel. Thanks for listening.